All right, I think we've got most people online, so let's get going. Now, although today's about leadership, it's really about stories. And that's because it turns out that absolutely everything is about stories. Our lives are about stories, business is about stories, leadership's about stories. Absolutely everything's about stories. But perhaps not stories quite in the way you're thinking right now. I'm not just talking about the sort of stories you might read in a book or watch in a movie. I grew up in Zimbabwe in Southern Africa. And my story, the story in my own head, is of this idyllic childhood. School, playing sport in the backyard with my older brother Tony and my younger brother Simon, and days spent exploring the wildlife in the African bush seemed to stretch forever from the bottom of our garden. Now, our house was this ever-flowing menagerie of dogs, tame and wild birds, tortoises, butterflies, chameleons, baby antelopes, monkeys, and a big concrete tank full of snakes that were a major fascination, especially for Tony. But in the background to all that was the grim reality of the Rhodesian Civil War. The forces of the Shona tribe under Robert Mugabe against the forces of the Matabele tribe under Joshua Nkomo, and both of those against the forces of the minority white government under Ian Smith. Now that war raged from the time I was 5 until I was 20. And our hometown, Mutare, which was then called Umtali, is right on the border of Mozambique, which is where Robert Mugabe had his main military bases. Our school was only 600 meters from that border. And sitting in class, we'd often hear landmines exploding in the minefield that protected the town from direct invasion. Mugabe's forces fired across our sports field sometimes while we were training, and we often had to take cover in the rugby pavilion. I learned to fire a rifle and a pistol at the age of 12. But you know, the war was just a normal part of life. It was all I knew. And so the story in my head to this day is still of this idyllic childhood. That is until that childhood was shattered in a 6-month period when Tony was killed in action in the army and I was conscripted into national service, as was every white male when they reached 18 and left school. And I ended up in the same unit and being posted to the same area where Tony had lost his life at the age of 19. Now, that part of the story had a major influence on me in the obvious way. But, you know, stories also have a huge influence on us in ways we don't fully recognize yet. Neuroscience research is showing us that we all quite literally create our own unique concept of the world, our own individual idea of reality, based entirely on the stories and associations we ingrain in our minds subconsciously as we go through life. And we then think and act in any given situation based on our often subconscious interpretation of our past stories. So none of us live our lives by responding to actual reality. We live our entire lives subconsciously conjuring up stories, images, associations in our minds that fit with our past experiences, and then we match those with the current situation and respond according to that. That is the power of stories and imagination. And it's why I believe we learn best from stories. So the big question is, what stories are in your head about your workplace? And what stories are in the heads of the people that you work with? Stories about the organization, stories about you, and what stories are in your head about them? Because perhaps without realizing it, the tone and messages of the stories we each have in our heads are flowing through to the people around us, to other employees, and ultimately to your customers. Gallup's State of the Global Workforce report, which was released earlier this year, surveyed some 150,000 people in about 155 countries, and it found that less than 20% of employees globally are engaged at work. Now, an engaged employee is defined as someone who feels highly involved in and enthusiastic about their work and their workplace. And that result is not related to, say, developed versus developing countries. Western Europe, for example, is languishing at the back as a region with employee engagement. Their rate is only at 11%. Sub-Saharan African countries are slightly better at 16%. Australia and New Zealand sit on the average at 20%. So this is very much a global issue. 80% of people are spending their working days simply going through the routine of doing what's necessary, perhaps to avoid getting fired. They're putting in time, but little to no real energy or passion. So just imagine the lost productivity and the impact on people's mental well-being. And yet, business units with high employee engagement achieve higher productivity, higher customer loyalty, better safety, lower staff turnover, and higher profitability. And that's according to another Gallup study of more than 100,000 business units. So how do you as a leader deal with that? How do you get people engaged in their work when everyone sees the world differently because they've got different stories in their head? How do you make sure that you have positive stories circulating in everyone's heads in your team and in the whole business to fuel that engagement? And that's what the Leadership Safari philosophy is all about. So today, I want to share a little of that philosophy with you through a different sort of story, an African animal fable that illustrates 5 key principles of what I call self-led leadership. Now, these aren't rocket science. They're just 5 simple concepts that, if you apply them, will transform for the better the stories you have in your own head and the stories you put, often unconsciously, into the minds of the people you work with. If a whole organization would choose to ingrain this approach to leadership, the positive impact on productivity and profitability would be simply astounding. But before we dive into the fable, let me explain what I mean by self-led leadership. Self-led leadership is based on a twofold premise. Firstly, that you can't lead others until you can lead yourself. You know, if you're not sure of who you are and where you're going, why would others follow you? And secondly, that good leadership is about helping others lead themselves better. Think about it. If your people worked well together as a team, if each of them was deeply engaged, involved, and enthusiastic in their work and in the workplace, if the corporate culture was strong and positive, if they approached change with a positive mindset, or even drivers of change themselves, then they'd effectively be leading themselves well, and they'd need much less management by you as their boss. And it's perfectly possible to create that sort of workplace. We did it in the 1990s in my advertising agency in Zimbabwe, where not one of our employees resigned in 7 years. And we did it a few years ago when I was CEO of Omnicare Alliance, where we merged 12 organizations with over 220 people in a 4-year period and achieved global top-tier staff satisfaction and engagement results in an independent survey just 12 months after the main merger. But there are 5 key principles that need to be in place first to get that sort of thing happening. And as I tell this African animal fable, I want to briefly point out each of those principles for you. So let me share my screen and get the fable started. Now, I'm going to ask you to stay on mute until the fable is finished, just so we don't lose the flow. And then I'm going to open up for questions afterwards. So this is a story that I wrote called How the Lion Found Its Strength. So as I get the campfire started, just sit back, relax, and imagine we're sitting together in the evening under a darkening African sky. You can hear crickets and frogs in the background. Let your imagination loose and come with me into the African bush on a leadership safari. In the long, long ago, just after Africa had drifted away from the rest of Gondwana to be Africa all on its own, the lions lived in the center of the south of that great exotic land, roaming the savanna grasslands that swept to the far horizon, specked here and there with acacia and baobab and jackalberry trees, and great herds of grazing creatures, large and small, antelopes and zebras and buffaloes and giraffes and warthogs, fed on the grasses and the trees of those delicious plains. And the lions fed on the grazers, because that's the order of things. Now, the lions were the most powerful of all the hunters, but back in those exclusive times, each lion hunted alone, and they didn't share their meals. And because they hunted alone, they mostly fed on the smaller grazers, the impala and the wildebeest and the warthog. And it was difficult and dangerous for a single lion to bring down a large grazer like an eland or a buffalo. The cunning hyenas back then lived to the east in the rocky foothills of the great range that separates the savannah from the sea. The lions had driven them there a few generations before to these granite hills where they had to hunt rock rabbits and baboons and lizards just to survive. But the hyenas were strong and fearsome with their sloping backs and their powerful jaws, and they were wily hunters as a pack, and they could fight, and they had devious minds and long memories. They would sometimes sneak into the lion's territory to steal the food right from under the nose of an unvigilant lion if they could. And they were always plotting ways to regain a paw-hold on the abundant grasslands from which the lions had forced them. Now, like all groups, the lions had a leader to keep the order among them and to protect the golden grassland territory on which they depended. And in the time of this tale, the king of the lions was a big, fearsome beast called Shinga, which means brave. Shinga was the bravest and the biggest, and everyone knew he was born to be the leader. And he roared like a leader, and he looked like a leader. He had his black mane, and he had rippling muscles, and he had fierce warrior eyes. And the other lions feared him, as their parents had feared Shinga's father before him. Shinga came from a long line of strong lions who had kept the order of things on the grasslands strictly in order. Now, as is the order of things, as time went by, Shinga began to grow older and weaker. And when he was finding it harder to catch anything much bigger than a scrub hare to eat, because remember in those far-off days each lion hunted alone, he knew it was nearly time for his firstborn son Husimba to take over as leader of the lions, because that was also the order of things. But that worried Shinga. Now, Husimba means strength. And when you think of a lion king, that's probably what you would think of. A big, strong, fearless creature with a fearsome roar and rippling muscles and a thick dark mane and fierce warrior's eyes. But Husimba wasn't like that. Like all male lions, he was quite big and strong, but his roar wasn't fearsome, and his eyes weren't the eyes of a fierce warrior. Husimba had warm, friendly eyes, kind eyes, and he was softly spoken. And he liked to sit under the shade of an acacia tree and think. "He worries me," Shinga said to Husimba's mother, Tira. "He's too soft, too gentle, and he's too little to be leader of the lions, as is his destiny. Our enemies will not fear him, and the other lions will not follow him if he speaks softly and doesn't prove his strength as a warrior." "He's still young," said Tira. "His character will grow and develop. But remember, he's not like you, Shinga. Yes, he has a kinder nature, but that doesn't make him weak." "Nonsense," replied Shinga. "There's no room for kindness when you're leading and protecting a kingdom. It's a weakness that others will take advantage of." Now, Tira was wise, and she knew not to challenge Shinga too far. So she lowered her eyes and fell silent, for that was the order of things. So it's interesting because Shinga thinks kindness and being a strong, decisive leader are mutually exclusive concepts, but they're not. For example, I've had to sack people for poor attitude leading to repeated poor performance, but I did it without being unkind. I didn't belittle or demean those people. I did it as kindly as I could. I just told them after numerous discussions, and I told them with genuine sadness, that I couldn't keep them on because they weren't delivering what was required of them. And they told me that they respected my decision. So a self-led leader is kind, even when they have to be tough. Now, late one day, Shinga summoned Husimba to sit with him as he sat on the top rock of the central outcrop, surveying his territory with proud eyes. "You were born to be leader of the lions, Husimba," Shinga said. "It is your destiny, and it will soon be your time. But I am worried that your nature is weak. I must know that you can be strong. You must begin to give orders, to let the others know that you have power. Your roar must echo across the plains. If anyone challenges you, you must fight them and win. You must start to show that you are to be obeyed. Then the others will respect you and follow you when the time comes." "Yes, father," replied Simba. "But I am still young, as you say. I am not experienced in the way of things, and many of the others are strong and brave, and of those who are not as big and strong, many are quick and agile and clever. Many are more experienced than me. When I'm king, should I not seek their help and their advice?" "No," snarled Shinga. "You are showing your weakness. When you are king, the others will need you to be strong and decisive. Our sworn enemies, the hyenas, want to drive us from these lands. If you do not lead the pride from the front, they will succeed. And you will have banished us to the rocky foothills. You will have failed our forefathers and failed the pride. Is that what you want as your legacy?" "No, father." Simba hung his head. "Then show that you are strong." And with a searing glance, Shinga turned, leapt down from the outcrop, and stalked away through the tall grass. And it's interesting because that sort of approach to leadership is still prevalent in too many organizations. It's industrial age leadership thinking, leading by dominance of character and sometimes by fear. But that simply doesn't work anymore, if it ever did, as you'll see later in the fable. So self-led leaders support and steer. They don't dictate and dominate. Simba sat there for a long time. Stars flickered out in the darkening sky. His mind was churning. He hadn't asked to be leader of the lions. It was being thrust on him because of who his ancestors were. He wasn't sure he wanted it. And what if his father was right? If he was too weak? If it took dominance and force to be a leader, he didn't know if he could be that sort of lion. A soft voice startled him. He hadn't heard his mother approaching. "What's troubling you, Simba?" she asked gently. "I don't know what to do, Mother. Father wants me to be stronger, more forceful, so he can trust me to take over leadership of the pride. But I don't know if I'm capable of doing that. I don't think I'm a leader." "But you are a leader," said Tira. "You're already strong in spirit, not in the same way as your father, but I've seen it many times in your heart. You just need to find trust in yourself, to understand your strengths, understand who you are as a lion. Your father may not know it, but there are many ways to lead, and force is not always the right way." "But I'm not even a good hunter," said Simba. "I miss more than I succeed. I've watched you hunting, and you're far better than me." Tira smiled. "It's the same with your father, though he would never admit it. Most male lions are not such good hunters. You are big and strong enough to bring down a buffalo, but your size can also be a hindrance. We females are smaller and leaner. We're faster and more agile. We can turn and twist in the chase. That's our strength. It's not yours. But always remember, you have your own unique strengths, Simba, and they're different to your father's strengths. You need to understand that and to learn how to use your strengths alongside the strengths of others. When you can do that, you will become a great leader." So, in this story, Tira is very wise, and I think she would actually understand the Ubuntu philosophy. I am me because we are we. So as a leader, if you can bring out the strengths of those around you and you create a team of people who complement each other, where one's perhaps weaker in an ability or a personality trait, another's strong, and if everyone truly understands that they depend on one another's strengths, then you can build a good, effective team. So self-led leaders focus on strengths, not weaknesses. Now, over the far side of the plains, in the shadow of a ragged cliff in the rocky foothills of the great range that separates the savannah from the sea, the matriarch leader of the hyenas, Taisa, was plotting a devious scheme. She was speaking to the clan for the second time in 2 days. "Have you all completed your missions? Have you done what I asked of you yesterday?" she asked. "Yes, Taisa," said one. "I went out and told those gullible impalas the story you said to tell them, that the great mystic barking baboon, who knows all things, has informed us that the streams and rivers across the savannah will soon be drying up, and that all wise animals should immediately and without hesitation move south to the great grey-green greasy Limpopo River,
or they'll die of thirst. And already those stupid animals are on the move. I've told the wildebeest the same thing, said another. And I've told the warthogs, said a third. And one by one they gave their reports. Stupid grass eaters, they all cackled. They believe anything anyone tells them. And then they just follow each other like lemmings. They'd jump off a cliff if we told them to. Thaisa was pleased. You have done well, she said. The great exodus of the small grazers has begun. Soon the lions will have too little to eat. Because they hunt alone, they can't bring down the large grazers like the eland or the buffalo. But we hyenas, who hunt together in a pack, we can. The lions will have to follow the herds of small grazers to the south. And when they're gone, we will reclaim the grasslands that are rightfully ours and live like royalty off the herds of larger grazers. Soon, my clan, we'll take back the territory that was stolen from us all those summers ago. Soon we'll rule the sweeping plains and be revered and feared just as the lions are now. The hyena clan whooped and cheered and giggled and squealed. Our own kingdom of plenty at last, they said to each other. I'm going to eat buffalo till I'm sick, said a ragged old hag. I love buffalo. I can't wait. It will not be long now, said Thaisa. We will watch the exodus from up on the cliff top, and when the time is right, we will make our move. Late the next afternoon in the Lionlands, Shinga sat on the top rock of the central outcrop and stared out over the rolling plains. He was puzzled and worried. The small grazers seemed to be leaving the grasslands, great herds moving southwards, crossing through the streams and over the curving horizon till they disappeared from sight. He couldn't understand it. Where were they going? Why were they going? Even in the dry season, they never went far. When the streams stopped running, the herds could still find water in the remaining pools, and they could browse on the remaining tufts of grass while they waited for the rains to come again. And he had started to hear rumblings from the pride. It was getting harder for them to find food. If he didn't do something soon, they'd lose faith in him as their leader. He had never faced anything like this before, and for the first time, he felt undecided about what course of action to take. There was a soft rustling in the grass behind him, and Tira appeared by his side. She looked up at him. You seem worried, Shinga, she said.
I'm trying to reach a decision, the Lion King replied. You can see that for some reason, the herds of small grazers are leaving the Lionlands, and the pride will soon be hungry. But if we follow the herds, we leave our territory unguarded and exposed. If we stay, our usual prey will soon be gone, and we'll have to hunt the large eland or the buffalo. That will be dangerous and difficult.
Have you spoken to any of the others to get their opinion? Asked Tira.
You know I cannot do that, snapped Shinga. I do not trust some of the others. They're likely to try to overthrow me if they see I'm unsure of myself. No, as king, I cannot be seen to be weak, especially at a time like this.
What about Usimba? Have you spoken to him?
What would Usimba know? Retorted Shinga. He's soft and he knows little.
Tira paused before replying. I know he's still lacking in experience, but he's wiser than you think, Shinga. And if he's to take over as king one day, would it not be good to involve him now so he can learn from you?
Shinga stared hard at her for a moment. He said at last. He does need to learn. It may do him good to be with me at a time like this. Send him to me, Tira. I will talk with him. And a short time later, Usimba climbed the central outcrop and stood respectfully beside his father. The king looked at him appraisingly. Your mother says that though you are still young and inexperienced, you are wise. We will see. What do you make of the situation with the herds?
It worries me, father, replied Usimba. The pride is getting hungry and restless.
I know that, snapped Shinga. But show me this wisdom of yours. Do you have a solution?
Usimba hesitated. Father, I may not be as forceful as you, but the members of the pride talk to me. I get to hear what is going on. There is bickering among them, Some are saying the herds will come back on their own because there's plentiful grass on the savannah. Others say we should follow them. Some believe there's something you're not telling the pride. And I think you should know that I overheard some of the young males talking of leaving and taking others with them to form a new pride.
And you?
Snarled the king.
What do you think about that? Do you want to leave the pride?
No, father. Husimba shook his head. I believe we all need to work together right now. But I think the pride needs guidance and inspiration to keep us together.
And just what do you suggest I do? Retorted Shinga scathingly. If we follow the herds, we leave the lionlands unprotected. If we stay, the pride must take the risk of hunting the larger grazers or remain hungry. Whatever choice I make leaves the pride in danger.
There was silence for a moment. Then, I think the herds will come back, Husimba said. There are no grasslands like this to the south where they are going. But the pride must be able to eat in the meantime, and many are too fearful to take on a large animal like a buffalo. But perhaps there's a third alternative, father. Mother said that we all have different strengths, and I've been thinking about that. What if we stayed on the lion lands, but learned to hunt together in groups instead of alone? With their speed and agility, a group of females together could run down a buffalo or an eland with ease. And if there were too few in the group to bring it to the ground, then a male with his size and strength could bring it down once the females have slowed it. A single buffalo or eland could feed at least 6 of us at a time if we shared the kill.
You think the pride would be prepared to share? Retorted his father. They have never hunted together or eaten together before. That's not the way we do things. The pride will not want to change from the ways they know.
We could ask them, said Husimba. If they feel they've been asked for their opinion and heard, they may be more prepared to try something new, and perhaps one of them may have a better idea. Shinga was thoughtful for some time. Then he said in a low and measured voice,
I can see that your idea might work, Husimba. But remember, a leader must be decisive. If I ask the pride to make the decision about what we should do, they will see me as weak. My position and the position of our family line could be at risk.
With respect, father, replied Husimba, his confidence growing. I understand what you're saying, but I don't agree. From what I've heard, the pride wants to feel they can trust you to lead them. But I think trust has to be earned both ways. Being prepared to hear their opinions and ideas in this time of uncertainty and then making your decision will show that you have confidence and trust in yourself and in them. If they feel you trust them, they're more likely to trust you. Then they may be prepared to try the new way of hunting, and we will grow stronger than ever under your leadership because the pride will feel we can all truly work together to overcome this threat.
And Husimba is right, you know. Trusting your people is a fundamental principle in good leadership. It's the opposite of how Shinga sees it. Most people just want to do a good job, and showing that you trust them by involving them in decisions, asking their opinion, not micromanaging them, will build their trust in you. Trust is a two-way street, and a self-led leader is trusting and trustworthy. By the time the sun cast its first yellow glow across the land the following morning, in the rocky foothills of the great range that separates the savannah from the sea, the hyena clan was getting restless too.
The lions have not left yet, Thaisa, whined one of the males. We want the kingdom you promised us. And our buffalo, said the ragged old hag.
What if they don't go?
Asked another. Do you think I don't have a plan B? Snapped the matriarch.
Plan B is divide and conquer.
Last night, I crept in to see what the lions were doing. There's disagreement among them. If they've not left to follow the herds by tonight, we shall move in, and we shall overpower them while they are divided. We shall fight on the grasslands. We shall fight in the hills. We shall fight in the rivers. We shall never surrender, and we will drive them out.
The clan whooped and cheered and squealed.
And at the same time, an unusual gathering was taking place below the central outcrop on the savannah. Shinga was addressing the pride.
We are in an unprecedented and dangerous situation, as I'm sure you're all well aware. Yesterday, I spoke with my son, and I have instructed him to speak to you now. Listen to what he has to say. There was a murmur from among the gathered lions. Shinga had never let anyone else speak at a gathering before. Simba stepped forward, and hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence, he outlined his shared hunting and feeding idea. So, he concluded after a few minutes, if you choose to follow this new way, we will all have to act together for it to work. But I believe we have the strength between us to get through this situation if we work together. In fact, I believe we will come out stronger as a pride on the other side because we will have worked together. We will have used our combined strengths to make life better than it is now for all of us. Simba glanced at his father, who sat staring straight ahead. Then he continued. Some of you may have ideas that will help this plan to work better. Or perhaps you may have some different ideas. We would like to hear them. What do you think? There was silence, then a hum of voices. Then the biggest and boldest of the young males spoke up. I am prepared to try this new way, to hunt together and feed together. And I have a suggestion if you're truly prepared to listen. Shinga rose to his feet. You asked to speak, yet I've heard that yesterday you were planning to leave the pride, taking others with you. Why should I trust what you have to say? The young male was silent for a short while. Then he said, I am sorry, Shinga. The situation is new and difficult, as you said. But we must be able to eat, and we'd heard nothing from you. But you've now given us a plan that could work. I would like to stay and to help if you will hear me. Shinga stared at him. Under the law of the Lionlands, I should cast you from the pride, he said. But I can understand your concern, and I believe you have much to offer. So I will not do that. I would like to hear what you have to say. You may speak. The young male bowed his head in respect. Thank you, Shinga. I am grateful. And because of that, I will support you and Simba in every way I can. I give you my word. My idea is this. Since, as Simba says, we males are stronger fighters than the females, but not as agile as hunters, I would like to take a group of us younger, stronger males to patrol the territory to protect against an attack from the hyenas, while the females, backed by the older males when they're needed, could hunt as a group. Then we could all take it in turns to eat, sharing the females' kill. So this bold young male proactively helped develop and implement a better system for the good of the pride. And that is the difference between leadership and management. If you lead well, your people will start to lead themselves, and they'll willingly follow or even refine or perhaps develop better processes without having to be constantly watched and managed. Self-led leaders lead people and manage processes. And so it was that the lions learned to work together. The team of young males, led by the biggest and boldest, fought off the hyenas' attack, while the females led the hunt in the new system. And when the hyenas had been driven back into the rocky foothills, all the lions ate together in turn. And over time, once the herd of smaller grazers had returned to the grasslands, the lions kept perfecting their new hunting process, and so they became stronger as a group and grew in number as a pride. And when the pride grew too large for the territory, some of the young males would go off with the king's blessing to start their own prides in other territories, taking the new ways with them. And the hyenas? Well, they were already adaptable, and they learned that it was best for them if they stayed in the shadows, hunting when the time was right, scavenging when opportunity arose, and every now and then feasting on buffalo. And today, lions still dominate the savanna plains, overseen by their king and working with their own strengths, and leaders in their own way, each and every one of them. So, that's the fable of how the lion found its strength. Now, I hope you enjoyed it, and I know some of you are taking notes. So what I want to do just briefly is to list the 5 principles of self-led leadership that were covered in the fable in case you missed one. So self-led leaders are kind even when they have to be tough. They support and steer, they don't dictate and dominate. They focus on strengths, not weaknesses. They are trusting and trustworthy, and they lead people and manage processes. Okay, now, just while I'm slide sharing as well, I want to quickly explain to you how the fable you heard today fits into the whole Leadership Safari series. So this is my Leadership Safari itinerary planner map. Now, each section on the map represents one of what I call the big 5 leadership territories. So these territories address the critical human skills of leadership, areas that many business leaders today rate as some of their biggest challenges. So obviously, main camp is where we were today, and that explores the principles, as you heard, of self-led leadership through that fable of how the lion finds its strength. It's really an overview of the philosophy of self-led leadership. And those 5 principles that we looked at flow through into these other 4 territories. So a safari into each of these other 4 territories really dives deeper into a specific issue. So what you can do is you can choose to focus on any one territory in a keynote presentation or expand it out into a half-day workshop, or you can work through all 5 in the series one by one in any order over time in a comprehensive leadership program. So up here, if we trek up to teamwork territory, this is where we explore through the fable of how the meerkats formed a family. We explore the 5 habits of high-functioning teams. Across the river here at self-awareness waterhole, through the fable of how the rhino got its skin, we look at the 5 principles for leading yourself so you can lead others better. And that includes tips for doing that. Down in Culture Canyon, we explore the fable of how the elephant got its trunk. And this takes us through the 5 principles of positive culture and employee engagement. And then back across the river again, we end up at Change River Ravine, which is the fable of how the leopard got its spots. And this is the 5 adaptation habits for leading ongoing change. Now, Change River Ravine isn't about change management processes. It's about leading a team or an organization in a way that embraces ongoing change, making it part of the culture, including how to encourage team members to initiate change themselves when necessary. So that's broadly how the Leadership Safari concept works. Let me stop sharing, and I'm going to open up to questions. So you're welcome to put questions up in the chat, and I'll answer from there, or you can feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question directly.
John, if I may ask a question, if that's okay with you.
Certainly may, Gail. Go ahead.
One of the things that we've certainly found over the last 2 years and the changes in workplaces, you know, staff working from home and the changing dynamics of teams and things that have happened through the last 2 years, how would these principles and that apply, given that it's now different from working in the office to, you know, I've noticed that a lot of the team is kind of silo off in many ways when they're working from home, and it's really disengaged some members in comparison to others. So how would that be dealt with?
Yeah, look, that is something that we deal with in the specific territories. But it's certainly that these 5 principles that we covered today, they still apply no matter what the format of work is. You know, whether you're working remotely or working from in the office with your team listening next to you at the desks around you, it makes no difference whatsoever. Those 5 principles still apply. The way you actually do that and deal with that and get your people engaged is something I specifically talk about in the elephant story in Culture Canyon. So we'd explore that specifically. I'm not going to go into it here because we probably don't have time, but that's what we explore in there. And if you want to have a chat to me about that at some point, feel free to give me a call, shoot me an email. Happy to have a chat about that.
That's awesome. And I assume then that it also works in the different levels, or do you do it with the whole team together, or do you do all partners together, or team members together, or how does that operate?
Okay, look, it depends on the size of the organization and the needs of the organization. But these principles apply to any level of leadership. It doesn't make any difference what level it is. It's not, this isn't only for, say, senior managers. You could use it for really junior managers, supervisors, team leaders. It doesn't matter. The same thing applies. I actually encourage a lot of organizations to do this sort of thing, to go through this, the leadership safaris process, even for people who are not in leadership positions yet, but who they've earmarked potentially, so potential leaders. Because then what you're doing when they get into leadership positions, they've already got that understanding, that philosophy behind them. And they're going to find their entry into a leadership role far, far easier. So applies to any level across the board.
As partners and managers, do we need to learn as well how to tell a story like you do? Because that was quite phenomenal. Thank you very much indeed. It was wonderful.
No, pleasure. No, you don't. The sort of stories that people tell in the workplace are done slightly differently. But yeah, thank you very much for the comments, Gail. I appreciate that. Anyone else got a question? Just having a look in the chat. No?
John, just to say, thanks for inviting me along, and it was wonderful. Not only was the storytelling great, the voices were excellent. Not something I didn't expect, actually. And I think someone commented about the use of the cap. It was great that we knew you were in storytelling mode when the cap was on, and that you were telling us the kind of moral of the story and how it applied to us when you took the cap off. So it was it was interesting to see that, and it was great. And actually, just to kind of follow on from Gail's stuff, what I'm seeing as a speaker agent is that a lot of clients are kind of suffering from similar things, and I suppose those two things Gail was talking about kind of come together in that on the one hand, you might want something that spreads throughout the whole organization, and maybe even from lower management level right through the organization, but also the fact that even at the most senior levels, and I've witnessed this with some of the blue chip companies that I've worked with, some of the big brand names that everybody knows, who have all suffering from the same issues that everybody else is. And that's that, we've not really gone through a period of time in recent years, at least, that's been anywhere near as difficult as this to lead and motivate people. And so, having the skills that I know that you can teach through these safaris, I think is really relevant, more relevant now probably than it has ever been. When times are good, people are generally motivated and you can lead them quite easily. Whereas when times are hard, you need more skill, and it's a much more difficult job. When people are siloed, when people are working remotely, and when people are going through very stressful times, as everybody is.
Yeah.
So yeah.
No, thank you, Michael, and you're absolutely right. When we're in difficult times like this, what has to happen is people have to, and I go through this in a number of the big five in those territories. But what has to happen is leaders need to adapt their leadership style to some extent. When you're going through a period of uncertainty, people actually want to be led. They want to be guided a bit more closely. So although it's still important to involve them and ask their opinion and get them involved and not to isolate them, sometimes as a leader, you do need to be a little bit more telling rather than involving in your leadership style. Because people are looking for that. If they're unsure in themselves, they want to feel they've got a strong leader, just like Shinga had to be a strong leader in the fable, and he learned to do that at the end and let the others talk. He still needed to make the decisions, and you need to do that as a leader. People want to feel they're being led.
And you're right, and I think, John, you're right, because that's a hugely difficult skill. It's something that quite naturally people would default to micromanagement rather than strong leadership. And that's a difficult balance, because if you go into the micromanagement, then all of a sudden you do the opposite effect and you demotivate people. So awesome stuff. Great value. Thanks, John.
That's absolutely right. Thank you, Michael. Anyone else? Any questions? Feel free as well to shoot me an email. All my information's up on the screen there. Feel free to shoot me an email. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Love connecting with people on LinkedIn. Feel free to phone me. I'm happy to take phone calls, messages. So if I can help in any way, if you want some more information, please feel free to just reach out and get in touch. And I'm going to close off there if no other questions. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending.
Excellent stuff, mate. Could I just take my cap off to you, mate? Like, just excellent, really powerful content delivered with wonderful stagecraft. Great to see you down a Zoom call. Thank you, mate. Really good.
Thank you, Marty. I must say it's different adapting these, because I started off obviously doing these pre-COVID face-to-face, and it's different doing them online. It works. It's just a slightly different concept. Face-to-face,
lovely.
Yeah, face-to-face.
Pretty to watch, mate. Pretty to watch.
Thank you, Marty. Really appreciate it. All right. Well, thank you very much again, everyone. Love being here. Loved having you with me. Feel free to reach out, and we'll be in touch soon. I'll end it there. Cheers. Take care. Bye now.